Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Kiley Hamlin is a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia and formerly held a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Developmental Psychology. She received her doctorate from Yale University in 2010 and her undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago in 2005. Her work explores the earliest developmental origins of the human moral sense by examining precursors to moral cognition and action in preverbal infants. She is currently on the editorial boards of Infancy, Cognitive Development, Child Developmental Perspectives, and Cognition, and is the Communications Chair for the International Congress for Infant Studies. Dr. Hamlin runs the Center for Infant Cognition at UBC and is a member of the Early Development Research Group, a consortium of 6 research centers interested in the development of language, learning, and social understanding in infants and children. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kiley Hamlin.
I'm going to try to clip this on. Let me know if it's reading. It's reading? Okay, great. I also tend to shout, so apologies in advance if I am too loud for the room. So first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and colleagues of mine have come and given this talk in years past and just said what a great group this was. And so anyway, just really happy to be here, so thank you. Okay, so my work starts with an observation, which is that social and moral evaluation, or just the sort of sense that some things in the social world we think are good and others we think are bad, is ubiquitous. So we're just a judgmental bunch of creatures, something that social media has made all the more apparent. So within the moral domain in particular, we view that certain things that people do are good and right and deserving of accolade and praise, and that other things that people do are bad and wrong and deserving of punishment. We see this as sort of separate from our own preference for these things. We see them as wrong sort of in a vacuum. One should not act in that way, or one should behave like this. There is, of course, cross-cultural variation in what exactly we think of as being a morally praiseworthy or blameworthy action, but the ethnographic record and careful cross-cultural study suggests that the differences are actually relatively few and far between. That in fact, everywhere people think that harming someone for no apparent reason is wrong and not permissible, for example. Okay, so where did these judgments, this moral sense, come from? And the developmental psychology literature has long suggested that one of the things that we do when we become creatures with a moral sense is that we explicitly internalize societal norms, and implicitly as well. But basically, we are specifically told by our parents, our religious leaders, our peer groups, the ways that it's okay to behave and the ways in which it's not okay to behave, and why, right? We also, in a more implicit sense, simply experience bad outcomes from behaving in certain ways and good outcomes from behaving in other ways. And, perhaps we sort of extrapolate that to, if everyone behaved like this, it wouldn't go well. Therefore, one should not behave like this, or something like that. And these pictures are just to illustrate that, we could experience these bad outcomes ourselves, or we could observe others experiencing them and make this sort of same implicit judgments. Okay, and again, developmental psychology tells us that these things absolutely do matter and do impact differences in moral outcomes. But the question that underlies the work that I do is, are they everything? So sort of, do we start out with nothing and come into the world sort of in some sense ready to learn or be taught both that certain things are right and other things are wrong? Or is it possible that any aspect of moral development emerges in the absence of these things? So the theoretical perspective underlying why this might be possible is about human cooperation. The idea that humans are moral and they also cooperate at extremely high levels, okay? Levels unprecedented in the animal kingdom. So we get together and take care of children and group hunt and build barns and all of that kind of stuff in ways that other species don't do, at least not with unrelated others. But to cooperate safely, we need mechanisms to distinguish those who are likely to cooperate with us from those who are likely not to, right? Because if you and I are willing to take costs to ourselves to help others, we will always be outcompeted by someone who's willing to sort of cheat our niceness, right? So humans, in order to enter into mutually beneficial long-term cooperative relationships, we need to be able to distinguish between the good guys and the bad guys, the ones who will do what they say they will and cooperate and help us build our barn, and the ones who won't. And we also need ways to potentially get people to start behaving better when they were behaving badly in the first place. So we need to figure out who's likely to behave well at first, and then if we identify those who are likely to behave badly, maybe because they have and we've seen them do it, we should have mechanisms to prevent them from continuing that behavior in the future. And lots of folks much more accomplished than me have figured out sort of mathematically how exactly this would need to work in order to allow the level of cooperation that humans do to succeed despite the risk of what's called free riders on the system, or sort of cheaters. Okay. So in summary, the argument is something like, because humans are the most cooperative species on Earth, we must also be the most evaluative and the most retributive, because otherwise cooperation will break down. And the argument that leads to the evolution of morality is essentially that this is, in some sense, morality. The idea that you cannot act in that way, you must act in this way. If you do act in that way, I'm justified in punishing you to get you to act in a better way. Okay, so that's the theory. And I approach it from a developmental perspective by saying, okay, so if this is what's required for a cooperative species to flourish, what about these things develops early or in the absence of the kinds of experiences that I mentioned a few slides ago? So things like language and teaching and enculturation, or specific personal experiences that one could like extrapolate from and to figure out what's right and wrong. And basically I examine a population with not none, but arguably far less of these experiences, the preverbal infant. And ask just to what extent do preverbal infants' assessments map on to adults' moral judgments. And sort of all I hope to convince you of by the end of the talk is that it's a lot more than you might think. Okay. All right, so how do we do this work? These are essentially my bread and butter research program. We show puppet shows to babies and see how they react. These are supposed to represent sort of quintessentially good and bad actions, ones that are sort of baby friendly, but that nevertheless inspire some judgment on at least my part. Okay, so here is an example. In all of them, they all have the same overall theme, which is that there's a sort of protagonist that has an unfulfilled goal. There's a prosocial character who helps the protagonist get its goal, and an antisocial character who prevents the goal from occurring. We show infants these events repeatedly until they habituate, which basically just means they're not interested in looking at them anymore. And that's the only real measure of like, yes, I've got it for an infant that we have. We counterbalance everything that we can. So basically the order, the color of the character, the side of the stage that they did their thing on, et cetera, to try to make sure that those aren't influencing our results. And with little babies, sometimes they actually do, like, they like red a lot. So we sometimes run into color preferences and things like that. And okay, so here we go. I'm just going to show you these kinds of events, and hopefully they'll be intuitive to you as well. Sorry, this is dark. Let's see. So hopefully you can see that it's a guy, he's trying but failing to get up a hill, and then he gets pushed to the top of the hill by the helper. On alternating events, they see the same failed attempt. And a guy who pushes him down the hill, that's the hinderer. Here is just another nice and mean action. So one guy gives his ball back. And the other guy steals it away. And this is just yet another example. There's a toy inside this box. And we've typically already shown babies there's a toy in there. They can also see it because the box is clear. So he opens the box and lets him get the toy. I like to end with that one because it's like really just dramatically not cool. So anyway, we show babies these events until they get bored with them. And they do like watching these events and respond sort of as though they're processing and even emoting in reaction to them. But our main dependent variable of interest, and I'll talk to you about other ones that we've done, but the main one that's sort of started the process is just having them choose between the characters at the end. Okay, so an experimenter who doesn't know what puppet did what that day, because for half the babies it was the yellow one, and for half the babies it was the blue one, that was nice or mean, just brings the puppets over and asks them to choose between them. So we just take the first visually guided reach that the infant makes toward one of the characters as evidence of their preference. With the puppet characters, we actually discovered early on that unless we make sure they see both before they start, they just immediately grab for puppets. So you'll see this process. She had to look at one and the other, and then we asked them to make the choice. This last video, I'll just show you a few seconds of it, but it's a 3-month-old baby who is not physically capable of reaching out for objects yet. For them, we just video them like this for 30 seconds and then go back and count the number of seconds that they looked at one puppet versus the other one. And then we can get like a continuous measure of interest, as well as a did they look more at A or B? Okay, so that's our basic dependent variable. It's not very forgiving, as we found out in later years, but it is pretty clear that the baby is making a behavioral response to the characters. Okay, so in the first, say, 400-ish babies we ran in studies like this, I'll show you this data. It's all on this chart. And the oldest babies are on the left and the youngest babies are on the right. The blue bars are babies who chose the helper, whether it was blue or not that day. And the purple bars are the babies that chose the hinderer. And as you can see, babies showed a fairly remarkable and large tendency to choose the nicer puppets than the meaner ones. And in fact, there are indeed more than 400 infants on this chart, and around 3 out of 4 of them chose the helper. Okay. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, why are they doing this? And of course, that has motivated everything I've done sort of since we started observing this. Very, surprising thing. I was a first-year graduate student when I started this work, and it was really an accident. It was like, I can't think of a study to do. There's this show that my advisors have been showing to babies for a totally different reason, and I hate that guy who pushes him down the hill. Like, maybe babies do too. And then they did, and it was like, oh shoot, like we've really stumbled on something here. So I didn't seek out to be like, is morality innate? It was really more of a like, what should I do for my first year project? And then they seemed to care like a sort of remarkable amount. So anyway, all that is to say, why do they care about this? And there are a few things I'll just note. One is that this is presumably a third-party judgment. They are sitting, approximately 6 feet away from these puppets. They are not bigger than most things in their life, but they're much bigger than these puppets. And they don't at least immediately stand to personally gain or lose from this situation. So someone else is being helped or hindered, someone that they have no previous experience with. That said, there are still, of course, many things that could be driving infants' responses in these studies, and we have subsequently tried really hard to figure out what those might be. So the first and not at all interesting possibility is that there's something about the physical behaviors that helpers do that they like better than the physical behaviors that hinderers do. So really this is like not social, not interesting. It's just something perceptual that's happening. So maybe they like pushing upwards versus pushing downwards, or maybe they like puppets who leave items on stage rather than take them away, or they like opening boxes versus slamming boxes closed. Maybe they find that scary, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to rule out this like lowest level possibility, what we've done for all the studies that I've shown you is had different conditions of infants who see similar but not social versions of the same shows. So a red rock gets pushed up and down a hill, or a box gets opened or slammed closed, but there's not an agent involved who wanted to open it. It's just one of these, it's hard to see, but those like grabber things that are plastic and you can grab stuff off shelves. We use those as like our stand-in non-social agent. But it does shake the lid of the box like the puppet does, et cetera, but of course is not worthy of sort of being helped and hindered. And basically what we find is that in every single case, infants don't prefer the push-upper or the box opener or the ball lever in these studies. So it doesn't seem like the very lowest version of an explanation is right. You have to do these physical actions to an agent in order for babies to make the evaluation. Okay, the other reason I don't think it's just low-level perceptual cues is a bunch of work that I can't take any credit for because it's not mine. But since we started this work, it's also been shown that infants prefer victims of aggression. And by aggression, I mean like a blue square squishes a red circle. These guys don't have faces on them, but they do move around as though they're agentic. So, I do, and most people do, see them as little cartoon agents. Infants will avoid the harmful agent over the victim agent and over a neutral agent as well. They also have shown tendencies to prefer someone who stops someone else from being harmed. So this is like awkward wordage, but they've called them protectors or defenders in the literature, or basically somebody who intervenes to stop someone else from being aggressed upon. So that's been shown. And lots of studies now have shown preferences for fair or equal versus unfair or unequal distributors of goods. So those who take two objects and give them out equally, like this little yellow bunny, versus take two objects and give 2 to 1 and none to another, or 3 to 1, things like that. Okay, so for those reasons, it seems like there's not a thread of perceptual similarity happening across all these different situations. Instead, it seems like they sort of like the nice ones and dislike the mean ones. Okay, before I go on, I do want to sort of acknowledge that there are a number of failed replications of these effects out there. So here's some that I am aware of. So at least 2 times the box show has failed to replicate and the hill show has failed to replicate. And in fact, sort of hot off the presses, this paper is under review, but we just did like a large scale replication of the hill show. Not a live show in the lab like we tend to do it, a video where everybody is showing babies a video, but they did not, as a group, prefer the helper, and that was several hundred infants. And more generally, our results in my own lab have not been looking that good since COVID. And we don't really know why that is. In particular, our choice tasks aren't looking very good. We have replicated the same effects using attention, and those look okay. So in particular, when babies are at home, sitting on their parents' lap, watching videos, and then do a preferential looking version of, say, exactly the ball show that I showed you, we find still pretty the same large effects that we always have. But in the lab, the babies aren't doing very well. And I have no idea why that is. And I think, people are gonna be writing textbooks about the effects of this stuff, and I don't know the answer. One possibility is they're just slightly more nervous and sort of not performing that well on a single DV. Like we get one measure out of each baby, which do they choose, A or B? That's it. It might be that that DV is really subject to noise in a way that like a preferential looking technique is not. But anyway, I just wanted to say that like the 400 babies that I showed you that all chose the helper, those were all pre-COVID. And since COVID, even I am having trouble finding these effects. Although they are still doing it online and with preferential looking. So I don't know maybe in like 5 years, I'll have an idea of what's going on better. But anyway, thought I would throw that out there. Given that, what is the overall state of the evidence for this from my lab and other labs as of last fall? So this is a very recent meta-analysis of everything. Basically, both manual, these dots are individual studies. And the black lines are at 0, which is no effect. You can see there's a huge amount of variation in individual studies adds to the size of the effect. But overall, and the y-axis here is age, so babies get older as you go to the right. Sorry, the x-axis is age. And overall, you can see there is a not huge, but reliable effect that doesn't seem to differ across age, and that the attentional measures and the manual choice measures seem to come out. Although people are using attentional measures more and more now, I should also have an axis for time, because my sense is that more people are using attention now, because during COVID, that's all we could do, because we were studying babies at home over the internet, basically. So anyway, but as of right now, this is sort of the state of the evidence. A couple of things that I'll note that the meta-analysis found is that the effect for studies using the giving and taking event that I mentioned are the strongest. I don't know why, but maybe stealing someone's stuff is pretty saliently not cool. Yeah. Also, it's shown that showing babies things in person, live, where they're actually watching this puppet show unfold, shows stronger effects than videos or cartoons of the stimuli. Both show an effect, but in person live shows definitely stronger. And finally, this is not significant, but I wanted to mention it because it's weird. But anyway, studies coming out of my lab seem to show stronger effects than studies coming out of other labs. This is marginal, thank goodness, but that is apparently the case. Okay, questions? Okay. So back to this question. Say we think there's some effect, maybe not as huge as I once thought, but some effect of babies preferring prosocial others. Why is that? As I said, it's a third-party judgment, and it doesn't seem to be due to any sort of any particular low-level explanation. But who knows what it's really about? Is it really about the niceness and meanness of these characters? I think we've far from shown that yet at this point. Okay, so for example, maybe babies just like motion facilitators or something like that, right? Like I want to go this direction and they like anything that helps me go this direction. Or I want to go toward this object and they like anything that helps me do that. So to sort of get at this question, we've thought a lot about, okay, well, what is it that makes an action helpful? Okay. And to me, and I hope you agree, it's about goal facilitation, right? I've got an unfulfilled goal and this guy helps me achieve it. Presumably they do something like take my goal on as their own or something like that, but let's not get into that level of explanation yet. So what we've done is basically just say like, okay, well, if it's about goals, then if we mess with baby's ability to infer a goal, an unfulfilled goal, they shouldn't show the effect, even though everybody acts in the same exact way. Hopefully people agree with that logic. Okay, so we've done this in a few different ways. In the first paper that we did on this, we said, okay, let's take babies' abilities to infer the goal away for half the babies. Okay, so here's how we did this. I hope this is clear, but it's not that clear, so I'm just going to tell you. Basically, the half the babies saw the climber look up the hill while it was moving up the hill. So as in like, I want to go that direction and I look where I'm going. The other half of the babies saw the climber look down the hill while it was moving up the hill. And in fact, this was only because due to gravity, the googly eyes were pointing downward. This wasn't actually particularly clever. When I was a graduate student and I first started running this study, I didn't glue the eyes up the hill. And we got together and looked at the stimuli and somebody was like, what is he doing? Like he's looking down and moving up. It doesn't make any sense. And so anyway, 10 years later, we actually did it in a study and it turns out it matters. Babies who see the climber looking up the hill while it's moving up the hill, they, in two conditions in this study, prefer the helper, and babies who saw the climber looking down the hill while moving up the hill were at chance. So it seems like they needed to be able to think that the climber wanted to move up the hill, as consistent with looking up the hill while you're trying to get there, in order to see it as an unfulfilled goal, in order to choose the helper. Okay, but maybe that's not what's happening, and there was just weird eyes googling around that were distracting them or something, and so maybe that's not the right explanation. So in a different study, we asked about individual differences in goal perception and whether that predicted preferences for the helper. The way that we operationalized individual differences in goal perception was using a method called predictive looking. So as adults, we do this all the time. Like if I throw a ball, you look where the ball is going to land. You don't watch the ball at every step of the way. And we also do this with goal-directed actions. So if you see me start to reach for something, you don't watch my hand as it goes and then to say, oh, she landed on the fork or whatever. You look to the fork ahead of my hand getting to. This is like a classic sort of thing that we do because we're smart perceivers of actions, right? And so it's been shown that by about 6 months of age, in really simple situations, even babies will predictively look toward a goal before, say, a hand reaches it or an agent gets to a location. And this has been argued to reflect goal understanding. So what we did is we took babies a little bit younger than this, and we showed them a cartoon version of our hill display because we could determine exactly where babies were looking at exactly what time. And we pre-registered a prediction that is that there would be some link between babies' goal anticipation, looking toward the top of the hill while the climber was doing its failed attempts, and baby's preference for the helper. Does that make sense? Okay. This is all done by my former graduate student, Enda Tan. And here's what the cartoon hill looks like. So using an eye tracker, we could look at exactly where babies were looking at exactly when. And we measured two things. We measured looking to the top of the hill during this unfulfilled goal phase at all. And we also measured back and forth looking between the protagonist, climber guy, and the top of the hill. And indeed, both of those measures predicted helper preferences in a attention task. So the longer babies looked to the top of the hill during this failed attempt, the stronger their preference for the helper was. And the more fixation shifts they did, which were correlated with the amount of time, but also independently, the more they preferred the helper. And indeed, a bunch of babies at 5 months, which we thought might be the case because they're not yet 6 months, which is when you're supposed to be able to start doing this, didn't ever look to the top of the hill. And those babies as a group were entirely at chance. They did not prefer the helper. But the babies who did ever look to the top of the hill did prefer the helper. Okay, so that was sort of our explanation or our argument that it's about the goal. If babies can see there's a goal, they like the helper of the goal. If they can't, they don't. Suggesting it is at least something like evaluating the helpfulness of the characters. Okay, I want to get through 2 more points before the end, so I'm going to go very quickly through some of this, but just the next set of experiments are all about this observation, which is that liking someone who facilitates goals is not the same as morality, right? And in fact, arguably, there's a huge amount of space in between liking someone who facilitates goals and morality, and I don't mean to imply that there isn't. For example, maybe babies are just thinking well, you're going to facilitate my goals, right? Which would be smart because, in fact, I mean, the evolution of cooperation argument says that in some ways, right? You need to determine who's a good cooperator in order to have cooperation work, right? But to sort of bring it back down, one thing that really matters in our moral judgments is intention, right? So not the intention of the climber with the failed attempt, but the intention of the helper and harmer, right? Did you mean to step on my foot, or was it an accident? Did you try to help me get my goal and nevertheless failed, right? I am okay being friends with an accidental foot stomper, and I am okay being friends with an attempted helper, but not the other way around. Okay. So everything I've shown you thus far, these things are confounded, right? The outcome for the protagonist is the same as the intention of the helper and hinderer. And it's not to say that adults don't care about outcome, right? We do, but we care more about intention when we're evaluating others. Young kids sort of notoriously ignore intent, as many dozens of papers suggest. But infants seem to be able to process intent in other situations, and so we asked, does it play a role here? Okay, and we've done this now in 3 different cases, and other people in the literature have done it in yet additional cases. And essentially the punchline, I'll show you one example before I move on, but the punchline is they care about intention. They don't care about outcome, it seems. Okay, so here's the first study we did to look at this. And we basically adapted our box show to involve failed attempts to help versus harm, such that the intention and the outcome were opposed for every single event. Okay, so here's a failed helper. Okay, so hopefully you can see he tried to help the guy with box, but they both failed together. The outcome is negative. Here's a failed hinderer. He miraculously opens the box anyway. We relied on the fact that they're babies and they don't know exactly what's happening by showing them this sort of strange event. But anyway, the intention is clearly negative and the outcome is positive. So in 3 different studies, we showed babies intention differing, whereas the outcome's the same. So like a successful true helper versus an attempted hinderer, right? In both cases, the guy gets his goal, but in one case, there's a good intention, and in another case, there's a bad intention. And we did all the crosses of that. We did this, so babies would have seen that puppet show followed by that puppet show, or the reverse order, where the intention and outcome are pitted against each other, so a failed helper versus a failed hinderer. And finally, something that, according to the developmental literature on intention and morality, to date, that should have been easy for them. The intention's the same, but the outcome is different. So both tried to help, but only one succeeded. Or both tried to harm, but only one succeeded. Okay. So these are 8-month-old babies. And what we found is in the outcomes the same condition, they went with intention. So they liked a successful helper versus a failed hinderer, and they liked a failed helper versus a successful hinderer. You might just say, well, we already know that they like successful helpers and dislike successful hinderers. Maybe they're not paying attention to the failed attempt at all. But when we pit them against each other, they went with the failed helper as well. And something that surprised us, and you'll note that the direction of the effect is kind of right. So it might be that with more babies, we would show an effect. They actually didn't track outcome alone. So if you try to help, you're good. If you try to harm, you're equally bad, whether you succeed or not. Okay, so we concluded that they're using intention, privileging intention over outcome, and in fact, at least not at the same effect size, using outcome. I will note that in this study, 5-month-olds failed across the board. And it might be that 5-month-olds are having trouble understanding failed attempts of any kind. Some studies suggest that's the case, other studies don't, but that is, 5-month-olds did not succeed at this, 8-month-olds did. Another thing that we did for this is that we did a control for actors that just coordinate their actions with each other. You might have noticed throughout that like the helper sort of acts more like the protagonist than the hinderer does. And so we did a control where there was no helping or hindering. It was just like 2 actors bouncing together and another actor slamming shut a box, because we thought maybe they just hate that. And that didn't seem to, they chose randomly in that condition. Okay. We found in another study with accidents, essentially, I can't show you this because I really want to show you some brand new data that I'm really excited about. But basically, they did accidents correctly too. They liked an accidental hinderer over an intentional hinderer, and they liked an intentional helper over an accidental helper. And finally, they liked a character who, this is going to be too confusing for me to say, but basically who knew they were helping versus hindering, but they didn't care about a character who was helping or hindering but didn't know it. Okay, so you have to sort of know that what you're doing is nice versus mean for babies to distinguish you. And if you don't believe that, and part of me still doesn't, because the study was crazy. A recent paper, not by me, but by a former undergrad RA in my lab, found that babies prefer someone who believes they're helping, even when they're actually hindering, because they have a false belief about the location of a preferred object. There's also been shown that young babies prefer an agent who tries to distribute things equally, but because there's a steep hill, the objects keep rolling away from the recipients over someone who tries to distribute things unequally, suggesting that this is a kind of relatively robust effect. Okay, I'm going to skip to the end. Oh, yes. They like those who harm those who've harmed others. That's the punchline. They like those who harm those who've harmed someone else. Yes. We found that in several studies. But I want to show you about the newborn data. Do you want to see the newborn data or the punishment data? Newborns. Okay, great. That's what I want to show you. Okay. All right, so this is ask the question of the stuff I've shown you thus far. A lot of it we saw with 3-month-old babies who they have to do preferential looking because they physically cannot reach for objects. This has led us to argue that at least what babies are doing is not extrapolating from this experience. So they're not climbing hills and being pushed down or pushed up. They're not retrieving objects from boxes. They're not giving and taking balls for people. They don't start doing that stuff for many, many months after they seem to be showing these sensitivities. But it's possible that they have some experiences that they're extrapolating from in other ways, right? So they're wanting to go toward this object, and sometimes they get carried toward it, and sometimes they don't. Things like that. I would argue that in a baby's relatively limited social life, it's not like they have, this is a hinderer in my life, right? Like I've got some babies, and they think I'm a hinderer a lot. Or at least it seems to upset them more when I'm a hinderer. Yeah, anyway, it's not like my husband's a helper and I'm a hinderer, or vice versa. Like we help and hinder freely, depending on the situation. Okay, but maybe what they're doing is some association, a quick one, a relatively quick one, and a cool one between being helped and hindered themselves and some positive or negative feeling or something like that, and they're then associating that with these other actions. It's also possible, I told you about the control condition with the coordinated action, but some have argued that that condition wasn't very good for some reasons, and that in fact what babies are doing is they're detecting coordinated action, that they like coordination, maybe for cool social reasons, like humans indeed do need to coordinate in order to get along with each other, and that's what we're showing babies are doing. So some cool social stuff, but not necessarily pro-social stuff, right? Okay. So anyway, in this recent line of work, we started asking how much experience is needed for babies to show sensitivity to these things. Okay, so we started studying newborns. Newborns are pretty darn helpless. This is my newborn. She's 4 now and much less helpless than this, much to my chagrin. No, but newborns have long been showed to preferentially attend to social stimuli. So faces over non-faces, upright faces over inverted faces, faces looking directly at them versus looking away, biological motion over scrambled or inverted motion. And in the last decade or so, there's a very small number of findings with newborns suggesting that they even pick out certain types of agentive actions that they like more. So they like agents, social things over non-social things, but may even distinguish between some agentive actions. So for example, they like to watch an event where a hand reaches for an object rather than when a hand reaches for nothing, which authors have suggested is like goal-directed action, attention to goal-directed action, or sensitivity to that. A very recent paper this year suggests that a newborn were attentive to biological motion. Do you guys know what I mean by biological motion? So like the point light walkers that you can tell like they're playing basketball and there's just a bunch of dots on a black screen. So newborns will attend to the point light walkers over scrambled dots. And this recent study suggests they attend to one moving toward them on the screen versus moving away. So that is a recent paper. Anyway, this is all work done on newborns in Italy by a collaborator of mine, Ali Garassi. And we have run 2 experiments as well as a pre-registered replication because we were a little bit shocked at what we found. And these babies are 5 days old on average. So they're not minutes old. Like some studies with newborns are literally like they come out and then they go and they do their test, which is so cool that the parents are willing to like do this for science. But these babies are 5 days old. So they're returning to the hospital, which is a thing they do in Italy, for their first post checkup. So they're usually in the hospital 2 or 3 days. They go home for like a day or 2 and come back. Okay. And with newborns, obviously, habituating them to stuff is hard. They can't reach for objects, et cetera. So what we do is called a dual video preferential looking thing. So over here, there's a video of A, and over here, there's a video of B, and you let them watch it for a minute, which is as long as a newborn will watch anything, and see how many seconds they looked over here versus over here. Okay. And they do 2 trials with the position flipped. So each baby sees 2 A's and B's, but it's A and then it's A. Okay. In experiment 1, we used an incredibly simple prosocial behavior based on the study that I just told you about. Rather than approaching and avoiding the baby, right? It's not like the thing's moving toward and away from them. It's 2 agents moving toward each other or moving away. And in experiment 2, we did a really, really simple version of the hill that I showed you, that I've been showing you all along. Okay, so I'm going to show you what these look like. This is one set of babies' visual paired comparison display, and that's another control condition. So let's look at the social condition first. There's a little wiggly ball. It's just going to keep repeating because it takes a while to figure out what's happening. Can you see that there's approach on one side? It's like really subtle. It's only the final like 5 frames of the event on this side. He moves back. Everything else it's identical entirely until that last few frames when he moves back. Okay. Here's what we show. Sorry, they shouldn't both be playing, but try to ignore that one and look at this one. The guy on the left does the exact same thing. The other thing is just an inert ball. It's not a character. So the idea is like physically speaking, it's still, he's doing exactly the same thing, but he's doing it in a non-social way. He's moving toward and away from an object. Okay? Does everyone get the logic? Okay, and we measure how long babies look at each side of the video in the social version of approach and avoidance and the non-social version of approach and avoidance. Okay, so here's what we found. Newborns in the social condition spent 20 seconds on average longer looking at the approach event versus the avoidance event, but only when it was a social event. Okay, when it was a non-social version of the same thing, they didn't distinguish them. Let me just show you the next. Here's our extremely simplified version of the Hill show. Here's the social version. So ball in the middle moves up and down a few times. And then on one side gets pushed up and the other side gets pushed down. Okay. In the non-social version, the ball in the middle stays completely still. It's not an agent. But really, most of the physical stuff is the same. Okay. Questions? Yeah?
How do they indicate preference?
Yes. So basically, we have, I didn't put it in. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we don't use eye trackers with newborns because you can't calibrate their eye gaze. It's all over the place. But we do frame by frame coding based on a fixation cross in the beginning that like baby looks here and then it's frame by frame. Is it more likely that their eyeballs are over on this side of the cross or on that side? Yeah. Great question. Sorry, I should have said. Okay. Here's the data. Again, babies look more at the prosocial event than the antisocial event. The pushing up versus pushing down, but only in the social condition, not in the non-social one. And then we were like, this is insane. There's no way this is a real thing. And so we replicated it and found the same thing. So yeah, we just submitted this paper like last week. So who knows whether it will have legs, but yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna finish up. So it seems like infants, preverbal infants, prefer prosocial to antisocial others. From 3 months, we've shown that preference. And they selectively attend to prosocial actions in these very, very simple videos by just 5 days. At least with the older babies, well, actually, even with the newborns, it seems like this is something social. The event has to involve 2 agents for them to show the effect. If it's only one, they don't. And at least with older babies, it seems to be based in mental states, like the goal of the guy being helped and hindered, and the mental states of the helper and the hinderer themselves. I didn't show you this data, but it is seemingly sensitive to the context in which actions occur. So they'd like someone who harms someone else before. And we found that at 4 months of age. And so all of this supports the claim that maybe some part of our, this is like a silly cartoon that someone did, not me, but it makes the point that some aspects of our sort of intuitive moral judgments, this idea that like, that's bad, that's good, he's bad, he's good, might be sort of emerging independently from experience in the moral world. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes for Q&A with Dr. Hamlin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely, yes. Yeah, is that the question? That's right, yeah. So the question was, what makes it non-social in the newborn study? And basically, we're relying on like a bunch of past data that humans are remarkably willing to attribute agency to like random blobs as long as they act like they're an agent. Very famous studies from the 40s by Heider and Simmel basically did sort of stop motion with like circles chasing each other around on a screen. You might have seen these before. And like people are totally willing to say like, that guy wants to catch this other guy. And they think that this one is trying to do this and all of these kinds of things. And in fact, if you go back to those original transcripts, which I did as a graduate student, it was remarkable to me that those studies have always been said that they're about intention reading, that like we're willing to attribute agency to random blobs. But in fact, if you look at the descriptions, they're very moral. So people will say like, the good guy is trying to protect his lover from the evil bully, or these kinds of things, which to me, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But to me, it was like very moral. It wasn't just they were attributing goals, they were attributing good goals and bad goals, and like good character and bad character and stuff. Yeah, so the main idea is that if it's an inert blob, we think it's a blob, but if it moves as though it's an agent even slightly, we are all of a sudden willing to attribute it all kinds of mental states. Yeah?
I have a question about the failures to replicate post-COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know have you done any analyses into the characteristics of the kids, the 25% of kids from the original studies who preferred the hinderers, and do they share any characteristics that are similar to post-COVID kids?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I have a whole bunch of slides on studies we've done following up on those kids. One study that is a relatively small sample, it's like 75 babies, that did multiple nice guy, mean guy shows when they were in their first year. And then we had their parents fill out social development questionnaires about them when they were 4, with some, variation around the ages, but average 12 months, average 4. And we found that there was a relationship between baby performance and parent-reported callous and unemotional traits at age 4. But I'll say that this is an incredibly small sample. And so there were a couple of kids that ended up with autism diagnoses later, and if you include them in the sample, everything's correlated. So all aspects of social development were correlated. If you only take the kids who did not get an autism diagnosis, only the callous and unemotional traits were correlated. So, at the time we were like, whoa, maybe we're really studying something about morality. And then we got a big grant to do a huge longitudinal study, which we've done during COVID. And a lot of our data just isn't looking very good across the board. It's not just these tasks, but generally speaking. So what I'll say is that from that, I do not actually think that COVID has made children callous and unemotional or something like that. What I do think is that kids are just nervous in our lab. So we get a whole lot more wary choices that just don't feel clean. Like it used to be, I put 2 puppets up to a kid and they'd look and they'd look and they'd go like this, right? And now babies are like, right? They're almost like, they feel just restrained in some sense. And so I think that our single DV is just incredibly not flexible to kids being unsure what they're doing. And so, it's taking them longer to choose. A lot more of them aren't choosing at all. And in general, they're just shyer and more nervous around us, we think. Yeah, so we have to warm up babies before we start the studies. Like, hey, baby, do you want to play with me? Let's, toss a ball back and forth, or let me tell you how cute you are and all of this. And they're different in that stage as well. Although that stuff is improving. I don't really know the reason. But I think it is telling that when they sit at home and watch the same exact shows on a laptop sitting in a high chair next to their parent, they do it fine. So I think it's something about nervousness in the lab environment, like a strange situation made like 10 times stranger. That's my hunch. Yeah.
My other thought is because of COVID and the amount of time they have to spend at home, like maybe they're watching more videos or TV shows than they normally would.
I'm sure they are. Yeah. From personal experience, I'm sure they are. Yeah.
responding better to videos.
Yeah, yeah. It could be that they're getting more out of video now than they used to. Yeah, totally. My lab tends to not do any video studies in the lab. So it's hard for me to pull apart, is it in the lab? Is it choice? Is it puppet shows versus videos? Those are all confounded in different ways. So I can't, but I think that could totally be something as well. Yeah. Yeah, so many things. Yeah.
Just want to be mindful of the time. We can certainly carry on this conversation afterwards. Please join us for refreshments. And please also join me in thanking again Dr. Kiley Hamlin.